Let me take you on a journey, a story that feels like it's from another world. Have you ever wondered what compromise truly means? Today, we explore a situation that dives deep into this question. My wife wanted an open marriage, but it backfired when my new partner turned out to be better. In the end, I left her for the other woman. I'm a 42-year-old man, and my wife is 40. We've been married for 10 years, and for the most part, our marriage was okay. Honestly, there were times when I thought I could have waited longer and found someone who was a better match for me. But back then, I felt she was good enough. I know it sounds awful to say, but I was 32 when we got married, and I was tired of being alone. To be clear, I'm not saying she was a terrible person. But sometimes, I wished I had someone who shared my passions and interests. My mother once told me that a partner doesn't have to be your exact mirror, and maybe that's what made me see her as the right choice for me at the time. Looking back now, I realize I shouldn't have settled. I feel this even more strongly after what happened, but let me give you the full picture so you can understand. Like most couples, my wife and I shared a good level of intimacy in the early years of our marriage. The first 3 years were great, but the next 3 years were significantly worse. Even so, I managed to keep the connection alive. However, in the last 4 years, things went downhill. In those 4 years, we were intimate probably only about 20 times. I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm not. I brought this up countless times, even suggested seeing a therapist who specializes in such matters, but those conversations never went anywhere. It felt like she was completely fine with the status quo and didn't consider my needs at all. As things got worse, I had to take matters into my own hands. I stopped making advances because the repeated rejection became unbearable. At that point, our marriage felt monotonous, but I appreciated her as a partner overall. I only felt truly frustrated when it came to our physical relationship. Despite my frustrations, I never acted on thoughts of infidelity, even though they crossed my mind during moments of deep disappointment. One day, my wife approached me to talk about our relationship. She said she wanted to discuss the physical aspect of our marriage. Outwardly, I stayed calm, but inside, I was excited. Finally, she was acknowledging an issue we had ignored for so long. I thought maybe she realized the need for effort from both of us. But I couldn't have been more wrong. She told me she wanted us to try an open marriage. I was stunned. It was the last thing I ever expected to hear from her. She explained that she felt bored with our physical relationship. Not because I was bad at it, but because it lacked novelty. She believed sleeping with new people could bring a sense of freshness to our lives. I didn't know how to react. My ego was bruised, and I sat there, wondering what to say. In the end, I told her I'd think about it and went for a long walk. During that walk, I realized that maybe an open marriage could benefit me too, considering how unfulfilled I had been. But it wasn't something I truly wanted. Still, if this was what she needed, I decided to agree. When I got home, I told her I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but loved her enough to give it a try. She was ecstatic the next day. We set some ground rules. No bringing partners home, no getting involved with anyone we know, and always using protection. Little did I know, this decision would mark the beginning of the end for us. And as I suspected, the idea of an open marriage was not the solution. It was a glaring sign of how broken our relationship had become. I think the main point is that I never tried to turn my feelings into actions. I felt guilty for even thinking about it. When the one person you are allowed to be intimate with constantly rejects you, it becomes hard to understand why you should hold back. One day, my wife told me she wanted to talk about our intimacy. Outwardly, I tried to stay calm, but inside I was a bit excited. She usually avoided discussing this aspect of our relationship, so her bringing it up was surprising. I thought maybe she realized we needed to work on improving our relationship, but I couldn't have been more wrong. When I told her I was listening, the first thing she said was, "I think we should open our marriage." I was completely stunned. I thought that was the last thing I would ever hear from her. She noticed my reaction and tried to explain herself. She said she felt bored with this part of our life, not because of me, but because it had become too predictable. She compared it to holding on to the same investment for 10 years. I immediately responded, saying I was always open to trying new things, but she insisted that the issue wasn't what we were doing, it was who she was doing it with. She claimed that being with new people could bring a sense of freshness and perhaps help her regain her spark. I didn't know how to feel about it. My ego was hurt. I told her I needed time to think and went for a walk. During the walk, I considered her idea. Maybe it could benefit me as well. But even then, it wasn't something I truly wanted. Still, if this was what she wanted, I decided to give her what she was asking for. After returning home, I told her I had thought about it. I said I wasn't happy with it, but because I loved her, I was willing to give it a try. Hearing this, she was elated. The next day, she suggested we set some ground rules. We came up with these rules. 1. No bringing partners home. 2. No involvement with people we both knew. 3. Always use protection. We also decided not to discuss our experiences with each other. With that, the arrangement began. She seemed excited and content, but I was very uneasy about this change. She mentioned that we could discuss this if we wanted, but I made it clear that I didn't like that rule. We immediately removed it, and from that point on, everything became official. She seemed to be in a much better mood right away. However, I was still unsure. I promised myself that I wouldn't be reckless with this arrangement. I also couldn't bear the thought of seeing her increase her count while I hesitated. I considered downloading Tinder but realized that it wasn't the right path for me. Instead, I decided to explore possibilities within the groups and communities I was already part of. I knew this wouldn't be as fast as a dating app, but I was looking for something meaningful. Meanwhile, just 2 days after our agreement, my wife dressed up beautifully and told me she was going on a date. She seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood, and for some reason it bothered me. It struck me that she had probably installed Tinder that very night. I deeply regretted agreeing to this whole arrangement. I realized that if the solution to our problems was to sleep with other people, it would have been better to end the relationship entirely. Still, since I had already agreed, I resolved to make the most of it. She returned home after midnight, and I pretended to be asleep. I didn't want to talk to her. The thought of her spending time with someone else made me feel sick. The next morning, I didn't bring it up, but I knew I needed to start exploring my options. There was a woman in an online server I was part of, someone I had always admired. The new situation gave me the chance to start a casual conversation with her. I began talking to her and lightly flirting. Thankfully, she responded positively. I've always been cautious about sharing my interests because I've often been judged for them. But I'm deeply passionate about building Lego sets and GPPLA models. It's my favorite hobby. This woman, let's call her Maria, mentioned that she had recently bought a new Lego set and would be thrilled if we could build it together. It seemed like a great opportunity to get to know each other better. I immediately agreed. I chose the next evening so I could mentally prepare myself. She would be the first woman I'd spend time with in over a decade, aside from my wife. That same evening, my wife went out again. It angered me, but I didn't let it show. She had now gone out 2 nights in a row, and it became clear to me that this arrangement might mark the end of our relationship. Honestly, I was angry inside, but I didn't let it show. Going out 2 nights in a row felt absolutely ridiculous to me. It had barely been a week since we started this new arrangement, and I already realized what a big mistake I had made. Still, I took it seriously because I felt like I had no other choice. The next evening came, and I dressed simply. I told my wife that I was going out. She looked surprised and seemed to stop herself from saying something, but eventually she asked, "Where are you going?" I replied, "I'm meeting a friend." She nodded, though her dissatisfaction was evident on her face. This gave me a strange mix of satisfaction and anger. Without saying much, I left the house. When I arrived at Maria's place, we greeted each other with a hug. I handed her the bottle of wine I had picked up on the way. Her house was beautifully organized. She had a table specifically set up for her building hobby. She loved working with Lego and building models. That's where we sat to get started on our project. She hadn't told me beforehand what we'd be working on. It was meant to be a surprise. When she pulled out the Titanic Lego set, I was genuinely astonished. I knew it would take more than a day to complete, but I was excited. I've always enjoyed working on large sets. Finishing them is incredibly satisfying. After 3 hours, we had made good progress. We snacked, sipped wine, and then I prepared to leave. Nothing happened that night. I didn't make a move. But honestly, I didn't care. I had a great time and told Maria I'd be back in a few days. When I returned home, my wife wasn't there. At that moment, I had a strong feeling that this entire open marriage idea might spell the end of our relationship. The fact that she even suggested such a thing in the first place was a massive red flag I had chosen to ignore. It seemed like if things continued this way, we'd only drift further apart. Eventually, she came home and smiled at me when she saw me. Her behavior felt childish. It seemed like she was trying to show that she had evened the score for daring to step out in our open marriage. She didn't enjoy being home alone, so she went out just to feel better. She tried to hide her smile, but wasn't very successful. She asked, "How was your time out?" I replied, "We spent the entire time building a Lego set. It was fun." She simply nodded and walked out of the room. I think she believed me, and that made her happy. Maybe she was relieved that I hadn't done anything wrong. A few days later, I grew restless to see Maria again. I called her and told her I wanted to come over. She happily agreed. She was happy to meet me and relieved to know that my wife wasn't home when I left. It was another day of building Legos, but this time with lots of jokes and an opportunity to get to know each other better. Honestly, she turned out to be exactly the kind of woman I'd hoped for. She was perfect for me. And even setting aside her physical beauty, her interests aligned with mine or were very close to them. She was undoubtedly more compatible with me than my wife ever was. I think this was the moment I realized how incredible she truly was. The problem was that I was becoming more emotionally invested in our interactions than the physical aspect of what we were doing. That day, after finishing our project, I headed home, where my wife was already back. I don't think she expected me to be out for a second consecutive evening. Unlike me, my wife had been keeping herself busy on her own. She probably couldn't keep men at bay even if she tried. With a sarcastic tone, she asked, "Were you building Legos again today?" When I said yes, she seemed irritated, but she didn't bring it up again over the next few days. I couldn't meet Maria daily, but we stayed in touch and kept talking. We continued working on the Titanic set on the days we could, and 2 weeks later we finally finished it. As one thing led to another, we became physically close too. Maybe I was just emotionally drained, but what happened between us was amazing. My wife had wanted an open marriage, and now I was finally beginning to see the light. However, to be honest, I didn't care about finding anyone else besides Maria. For full transparency, Maria knew I was married. She was also aware of the situation I was in and that I wouldn't be with her without being honest about it. I wasn't sure if my wife was spying on me or something, but that night, she said she wanted to talk. She claimed she wanted to break the rule we had set about not discussing our partners. When I asked why, she couldn't give me a real reason. Instead, she began talking about the people she'd been seeing. Apparently, she had already been with 3 people in just 2 weeks. She kept looking at me, maybe expecting me to get jealous. But honestly, I didn't care. Then she asked about the people I had been seeing. It was clear she was eager to know. While I could have declined to answer, given the rules we'd initially agreed on, I wanted her to know how much Maria meant to me. I told her how Maria and I shared similar interests, how we both enjoyed the same kind of media, and how kind and sweet Maria was. Finally, I revealed that Maria and I had slept together. Hearing this, she looked absolutely shaken. I'm sure she didn't expect me to be so honest about it. Why are you acting so pathetic? You know an open marriage means sleeping with other people. Don't tell me you're just trying to be friends with this new person. It's been 2 weeks, and you're still only with one person, she scoffed, laughing mockingly. I just sat there, stunned, never expecting to hear something so dismissive. I shrugged and stayed silent, trying to process her words. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "I think I don't want to do this open marriage anymore." Her sudden declaration caught me off guard. It was clear she felt threatened, but I couldn't understand why this change came so abruptly. I replied, "You're the one who wanted this in the first place, and now you want to stop?" She responded, "I can change my mind if I want to." Don't make it a bigger deal than it is. After hearing her out, I calmly said, "Fine." But almost immediately I added, "I want a divorce." I didn't even know where those words came from, but it felt right. I realized that my feelings for her had shifted dramatically with the whole open marriage situation. I now had someone else in my life who made me feel genuinely happy, and I knew it was time to move on. Her reaction was explosive. She threw the TV remote at my head in a fit of rage, but I dodged it just in time. Afterward, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I wanted to tell her to pack her things and leave, but I feared she might hurl something heavier at me next. In short, I left the house for 2 days to clear my head. During that time, I also started looking for a divorce lawyer. I truly believed there was something special with Maria, and I wasn't going to let this new opportunity slip away. Finally, I served my wife the divorce papers. If you've read the previous parts of my story, you'd know she didn't handle the situation rationally. Things ended messily, and her jealousy only made the process harder. However, the divorce proceedings eventually concluded. The most satisfying part was proving that the open marriage idea had been hers all along, which strengthened my case. I ended up keeping the house and most of the assets. Now I have Maria, a woman who fits perfectly into my life in every way. I wasn't initially looking for a way out of my marriage, but when she proposed the open marriage, it became clear to me that this was my chance to rediscover myself. I moved on quickly and started a new chapter in my life. I'm in a much better place now and am genuinely happy with how things turned out. This entire experience taught me that waiting for the right person is always worth it. By the end of this whole ordeal, there were a few text messages exchanged between us that ultimately proved my right to keep the house and most of the assets I cared about, including our car. As far as finances were concerned, I didn't have to pay alimony, but I did have to give up about 50% of my bank account. It was definitely a tough pill to swallow, but for me, it was the cost of peace, knowing I wouldn't have to worry about her anymore. As you might have guessed, I've started spending time with Maria. Honestly, maybe it's just because it's a fresh start, but I can't remember being this happy even when I first began dating my ex-wife. Being with someone who truly cares for you is a completely different experience. This entire situation has taught me that waiting for the right person is absolutely worth it. When someone suggests an open marriage out of nowhere, especially as a solution to intimacy issues, it's a massive red flag. It makes you realize how much you were missing that deep connection in your previous relationship when you find someone who shares your passions and values. It's unfortunate that I had to go through all of this, but in a way, it clarified exactly what I want in a relationship. This experience gave me the opportunity to realign my life and priorities. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next update. See you soon.